Welcome to the Ideal Spaces Working Group podcast.
I want to come back to the point of Dennis Nietzsche. It's about numbers. Modernity has been characterized by the relation between mass and power. So we have on the one hand, we have the need to exercise power over masses, people or products or material flows, whatever. And the masses, they exercise their own power. This is prevalent until today. We have masses of images, we have masses of consumers, and so on. And the question regarding place and a true sense for community in the communal, you cannot do this. And this is the point of Dennis and of Aristoteles altogether. And it's a problem. You cannot have it at once for 1 million people. As a neighborhood means we know the people, we know each other. For instance, in these Italian cities you mentioned, I've seen it in Siena. When in Siena as independent from the tourists. When I, as an inhabitant, live here, and the richer man lives right the next door, as in medieval Siena, we have to see each other each day. We cannot separate. We have to pay respect for the other, independent from its background. It's a civilized behavior. And to re-achieve this with these masses of people we have today, the only possibility is via neighborhood concepts in some way or the other. Okay, but a neighborhood concept only works if the neighbors are willing to collaborate. What if the neighbors are not willing to collaborate and are this new human species of a retreated individual using the words? Click, 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 click. What then?
Well, to see each other, like in a mixed community where people of different backgrounds, economic levels, religions, so forth, when they walk out their door and they can see each other. Yeah. So I think that transitions the conversation a bit to public and private. Like the activity you were describing of, passive engagement was really happening probably largely in a kind of privatized moment. And you felt like that button, that when you hit the button to sign the petition, you were participating in a little bit of a public activity, but it's still in a very controlled environment of your interaction in that moment. Whereas when you walk out the door, you're giving up some control because you're entering into the neighborhood or you're entering into the public realm, and therefore who you see, who you come in contact with is no longer under your control. And that's where I think the question of place in relation to community, if place is about belonging and inclusiveness, the public realm is critical to that. Can we have place that's privatized versus public? And the opportunity to build connection, the opportunity to be active, the opportunity to mobilize, the Arab Spring or the Occupy, or yesterday, the No Kings. Although I heard it was in the UK, it was no tyrants. They couldn't say no kings in certain places. That was mobilization, and it had to happen in the public realm. The only power that could possibly have is in the public realm. So I think the sense of scale, finite scale, finite, number of people you can deal with. When 100,000 people gather in a square, in Tahrir Square or in Times Square yesterday, you feel the physical impact of people in space. So the finiteness, Leon Creer, we might talk about more tomorrow about like how big can a neighborhood even be to be.
Yeah, but before Leon's theory was really some incredible, powerful lights in the darkness of the 20th century. But it's also necessary to remember that much earlier than Leon Krier, when it was this terrible problem of growth of Rome after the unification of Italy, in Italy in Rome was this great figure that is Gustavo Giovannoni, who was he's responsible of the greatest research made on those days on the way of designing places. And it was not based on theory, but it was based on analysis. So he was traveling in all the villages in Siena also to understand what were the dynamics of the development of a settlement. And by accident, he got to the point which was at the base of the design of the new social housing neighborhood in Rome, which were mixed income, not only for working class, which was saying that whatever settlement that was a city organized with a series of districts that originally used to be villages or borghi, or it was a simple borgo, when the dimension of that space was reaching roughly 800, 1,000 meters, which is exactly what we define 10 minutes walk. They were building another one nearby, and he was talking about the natural duplication of self-sufficient settlement, which goes back to what you were saying earlier. So obviously a neighborhood must be provided with all the functions that are making that space self-sufficient. So we can't forget number of schools, we can't forget the shops, we can't forget a police station, we can't forget anything that is making the hospital, is making that space self-sufficient. And this is something that is definitely doable now, because we need to make this kind of Marshall Plan, as I mentioned earlier, which is not a reconstruction after bombing, but is replacing what has been built wrongly, polluting the planet and destroying the social life of people.
I mean, it's really, really interesting. I mean, if we go back to the meaning of citizenship, particularly after the Second World War, so the general definition of citizenship is rights and obligations we have towards the state and what we expect from the state. After the Second World War, citizenship was divided into different aspects. So there was economic citizenship, the rights of economic sort of development and to take part in that. Political citizenship, the right to vote for people. Civil citizenship, certain freedoms or civil rights, I guess one could expect. And then what we seem to be talking about here is social citizenship, welfare rights, the right to housing, the right to hospitals, the right to education. Now, what has occurred is that social citizenship is often historically been shoved to one side, whereas, you get promoted more economic citizenship and political citizenship. So, liberal democracies, hey, you've got the right to vote, which is obviously very important. But what about social, the infrastructure to cater for people's needs, which I think that's what we're saying is that's really, really important. For communities to be rebuilt, you need decent housing, you need hospitals, you need decent education and so on. And I think what's occurred is that social citizenship and often civil rights, civil citizenship has often been alluded to, but not given the strength it deserves. And maybe that's what we're trying to rebuild now, are those elements. And I think certainly the question of space and place in the community is really, really important. And but you do need that more macro element as well. Governments prepared to invest properly in this social infrastructure. But one thing also about bringing people together, certainly it's been emphasised in the UK at a very local level. Certainly people, going into public spaces and asserting their rights, such as in what's happening in America in the last day, and in other examples, we've mentioned Occupy, it's very important. But on an everyday level, people often do try to make those connections. They like to just help out in their communities. And there has been a push by governments to get more people to engage in voluntary activity with their fellow sort of local residents. And that's often based around people being involved in community events and in places that are meaningful for them. So in the UK, more and more people are helping out to look after their local parks. So you get this, you get a big movement now called Friends of Parks. Now it's a double-edged sword in a way. It's good people come together to help out. And in my local park, there's a big Friends of the Park group where some people give their time freely. But to what extent is that just plugging the gap of social citizenship? Because actually the parks are just not getting the money they should be getting from the government. And so people are out of need, or we better jump in and look after the parks. So they come together. But is it around social citizenship, or is it around the politics of austerity? And one interesting thing about COVID is certainly in the UK, the numbers of people involved in voluntary activity and helping out and looking out for each other went up quite significantly during COVID. And now it's dramatically dropped. Now COVID is now seen to be sort of ended. And again, most surveys show that people can't get involved because of the politics of austerity. They're working long hours, trying to make ends meet. And even with this local Friends of Park group, they often put it, and they've got a very active Facebook group, but they're often saying we need more people to be involved because it's just maybe 3 people who are doing most of the work. And again, that sort of shows that the social citizenship isn't there. Although there is a voluntary network there, they need more resources, and people need the resources also to free up their time to then help out and have that sense of belonging in local community places and space.
And you use the word meaning, and I think that's maybe part of a critical path of thinking, because meaning in place, like to care about your local park in your neighborhood, if 3 people are keeping alive the Friends of the Park, it's meaningful to them, but maybe it's not meaningful enough to everyone else. And they're maybe more tangentially involved when it's convenient.
Yeah.
But so, I think the idea of place, if we think that place is a linchpin of what, communities cannot exist without place, that a sense of belonging in place are totally intertwined, perhaps identity. So we might shift the conversation. We're talking about place, we're talking about citizenship. If we weave in identity, meaningfulness is important. So if I go out into a place in my community and there's a place, that might be meaningful because that's where my grandfather took me when I was a kid. That might be where I know I can go out and just sit and be quiet and enjoy, a kind of indirect contact with everyone who's around me going about their daily life. It could be meaningful because that's where we saw a great concert in our community. That could be meaningful because that's where we went to protest for the Occupy moment or the No Kings moment. So the meaningfulness is connecting us. It's helping us feel the belonging. Maybe it's even helping us think of that place as part of our identity, like how we identify ourselves around our neighborhood, around our Campanile, what brings us, what binds us to our neighbor.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the case of the park, it's interesting. Yeah, you mentioned about belonging and things being meaningful. So this local park, the Friends group, have got lots of things done. They've got new play areas for children there, and a lot of people are very appreciative of what they're doing. And so on their Facebook page, a lot of people always do lots of likes and, this is great work. But again, though, they still, the 3 or so people are still saying, we need more volunteers. Although saying that they do every few months have a volunteer morning on a Saturday for people to help clean the park and to get to put gravel down on the pathways and that. And, they get more people joining up for those one-off events. And again, that's a way of making things, getting people to be invested in that particular community asset, if you like. But yes, I think they, for the real sort of meat and gristle of it all, they do struggle, to get more people to volunteer. And again, I think it's because that level of social citizenship, the resources for that broadly within the community have been hollowed out in the last 30 odd years, where people don't just have the time or resources to commit for, a long period of time every week.
But this phenomenon is clearly something that is related with the natural way of being a human, which is a social animal. And Zygmunt Bauman, a great sociologist, wrote about the will of community. And it's clearly talking about that. So maybe I can have enemies saying this, but I think this idea of having volunteer is wonderful. But on the other hand, it's putting the state that is the one that receives our taxes to say, okay, I don't care because I know that someone is going to do it on behalf of me. And this is really unfair. As a humans, we have to bring the state, whatever government, whatever party is, to be responsible for what his task. This morning I was talking to Jason about something that is written in the Italian civic code that is referring back to the ancient Roman right, which is an article that is called La diligenza del mandatario, which is the right behavior of the administrator. And the article says that the administrator has to behave like the good father of the family that is giving the right example to his children. This is something on which we have to think, because as a community, we need to have the respect of our rights. Because if we don't give the right example as a governors, we can't suppose that people are going to do it better. Obviously, there are clusters of people that in the UK can do this. If in Italy I create a committee of my district to repair the sidewalk, I will receive a fine because I'm not allowed to touch the public land without being approved by the community, which is absolutely crazy. But this goes also to what you were also mentioning, which is something that is related with the economic conditions. And obviously that is a serious problem. And then, one more time, it will be nice to watch at our back and see what was the way of our ancestors that were much more advanced than today, because they understood what was the cost of managing places. So our ancestor, obviously cars were not existing yet, but in any case, they had some deep respect of the countryside, and they were building very compact city, which doesn't mean to build a skyscraper, but means to do something that is dimensioned according to the human needs, provided with all the function, provided with all the spaces for gathering people together with the network of piazze and piazzette, whatever you want. But it's something that is manageable. Just 2 days ago, I was in a debate in Rome, and it was one member of the Sovrintendenza Comunale that was proud to do something I'm always joking about, which is something that you can find on the webpage of the Comune di Roma, that is the map of Rome, that is proud to show how the perimeter of Rome, the surface of Rome, can contain inside Milan, Naples, Turin, Genoa, Bari. It's crazy. And I always refer to what is, I have some PowerPoint where I show the size of Rome at the end of Roman Empire, where the archaeologists estimated some population between 1.7 and 2 million of inhabitants, that was within the perimeter of the Aurelian Wall, which is 19 kilometers, was 13.2 square kilometers. Today, Rome has 2,800,000 of inhabitants, but the perimeter, the surface is 1,382 square kilometers. This is crazy. If we think about the cost of building, but especially the cost of maintaining streets, sewages, aqueducts, electric line, gas line, etc., every year in Rome, there are a couple of people that are dying because one branch of a tree fell and killed them while they are motorbiking. Because someone is working on maybe cutting the roots because he's making new electric line. There is no control because there is no money enough to have the control of the management of the city. And the bigger is the city, the worse are the problems. So it's necessary to think about the clusters that are autonomous, where you can manage properly these things.
Because it's an interesting aspect. This relates to this discussion about numbers, and in more general terms, it relates to the role of the state, or to make it more concrete. Do we need some central services, even if we are neighborhood-based, more or less autonomous communities in the positive sense? We still need some central services, very, very practical. Electricity, street system, sewage system, and so on, which means translated to the role of the state, we need some central management. The very idea of the polis is decentral. The very idea of the community approach and the neighborhood approach is a decentralized approach. No? What's about the role of central management? No? With its inherent power, no, of suppressing the individual autonomy of the community in question. This is an important practical point also. So if these neighborhood-based communities will prosper, if we have, in other words, more and more decentralization, what happens with the very idea of a centralized management? There might be a huge contradiction very soon in terms of political power. So very, very practical.
I mean, in the whole question here, I mean, the whole political, socioeconomic overlay to community and place plays a big role. But Dennis and I yesterday were discussing in a small city, someplace which we won't name, that you had a localized government over a population of under 20,000. They had millions of dollars at their disposal. And what did they do with the money? They decided to build a massive swimming pool center. No money was put into city structure, expansion of the city, services for people. So there's a basic human condition flaw that we have, which is called ego. And basically this ego takes over all the good people trying to do things and help people and develop the place, and are being killed off by the basis of ego taking over sensibility. And this is a really big problem, and it's a major flaw of the human condition.
Yeah.
It's the selfishness of our society, which is based on the consumerism, and there is this ridiculous percentage, which is less than percent, is 1 per 1,000 of the inhabitants that is richer than the rest of the planet, that is imposing the rules for everybody. Back to what I was saying earlier about the investment on technology. After the COVID, to relaunch the economy in my country, apparently because of Bruxelles philanthropy, which is giving money to receive interests, billions of euros have been offered on all the countries in Europe, in Germany too, to be invested for relaunching the economy that were destroyed because of the COVID pandemic. And the only lesson that was to be learned from COVID was that it was necessary to consider the importance of the public system of health. We paid a lot of taxes in Italy, but there is this tendency in going toward the American system of privatization of hospitals. So when the COVID arrived, we discovered that in the last 5 years before the COVID, many hospitals were shut down and many intensive care rooms were shut down. And I'm talking about thousands. So at that point, it was no way to take care about those that were needing the intensive care. So I would expect that when this money arrive, I will invest the money in the point of weakness. I was investing this money in health, in culture, because that is our treasure in Italy, in the restoration of our heritage. And then I would take in consideration also the technology and all these things. And at the end, to health, less than 7% of these billions was given. In culture, for the schools, less than 3%. In heritage, almost nothing. All the investment were on the green revolution, which is making something that is everything but sustainable, and investing in technology to push the school. The only money that were given to the education were to bring in the schools computers and system for teaching from remote, shut down the library to use PDF available online, which is something that is really switching off the brains of our children. So we are responsible of our situation. We have no justification for this, and it's time to think about these problems, which are generated only by humans.
So yes, then, before, sorry not to interrupt you,
Yes.
then therefore couldn't we basically state that indirect democracy is non-functional?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, this is an important point when we are speaking about citizenship and involvement.
Just to add, maybe, but maybe it's the best worst system we got. So anything else would be even worse. Just not to keep that sounding in my know.
So I'd like to, just before we have a break in a little bit, I'd like to think about identity in the mix of all this. So we've talked about place, we've talked about attitude, we've talked about, some governmental structures. We've talked about, internet and social media a bit that can have positive and negative impacts. So, and Ettore brought up the idea of like the children and the elderly, and one of the chapters of a book I'm writing, or actually a few of the chapters really say, okay, if we design public space, for example, to accommodate children and old people, we've probably made it universal and inclusive. But often what we're doing is designing space for just, the people like us, right? Mobile, middle-aged or whatever. So let's talk about, so I think we should weave in the idea of identity because, for example, that might raise questions of meaningfulness. That might raise questions of, confidence to participate because through identity, the sense of connection to the town or the neighborhood. So I think how do we see in the human condition that we keep coming back to, how the human condition is either, somehow transforming in a way that we don't need all these things anymore. We can be autonomous versus a social creature. How is identity being formed? And I guess we could, one experimental way to do that would be to think of young people. Like if you're a child growing up in your household, in your, hopefully, a neighborhood, how are you forming your identity on a daily basis? How does your commute to school, or your visit to the park, or your, just walking with your parents to the grocery store to buy your food. And like if I go to meet my friends, if my friends and I meet at the local pub, or we go to the cafe, how is that all part of a formation of identity? So let's think about identity, because I think that'll come back in the rest of today and then also tomorrow, how we feel, how the individual is relating to the community.
I think this identity point is crucial, because this identity has to explicitly refer to ideas introduced earlier. This responsibility and this ethos point. This relates to meaningfulness. So I need an immediate neighborhood, because are human beings. I have to be respectful against that. This is it's very important. And then we can make some common projects. Okay. But on an everyday basis, this was your school bus example we discussed yesterday. I see people in the bus. I trust these people. There will be no crime in the bus. This is very, very essential to form my identity. And out of that, if combined with some explicit combined action of us as citizens, we can develop an ethos. And when we have an ethos, we have an identity. And then we do not have to discuss about identity, because we have a sense for it. Okay, and this would be the best outcome. Would be. The question remains, when we look at our prevailing life circumstances in our daily lives, we live in functionalized, fragmented worlds. And it's very difficult to generate a feeling of identity in functionalized and fragmented worlds. This is a contradiction.
And especially if we're raising, say, young people in that environment, right?
Exactly.
But the problem, one of the biggest problem is the amount of years we passed believing in a lot of lies that were presented. And the way we can now let people know that someone was lying. Thinking about the places we live, the identity of places we live, we as architects, we have to think about what happened almost 100 years ago, when with the fourth Siam, it was decided that the historical city was wrong. With the Athens Charter. And we need to have the courage in the School of Architecture to say that the gods we believe are wrong. Because if today you go to a School of Architecture and you accuse Le Corbusier to be the criminal responsible for what happened, you will be blamed for that. But I publish essays where I'm documenting the real series of letters between him and Gideon, when Gideon is afraid to publish the charter because it was no agreement at all. And Le Corbusier is offending him and is imposing the publication. And the publication happened only in 1941, while the conference was in 1933. And Le Corbusier published that document as a common agreement on behalf of the French Siam. And they decided that the historical city was wrong, was to be abandoned to the functional city, which is exactly what today it is recognized as dysfunctional. But a lot of theory were made on those days. And we are talking about days when were the dictatorship, because in Italy it was Mussolini, in Germany was Hitler, in Russia was Stalin. And Le Corbusier was writing all the worst dictator to use the dictatorship to impose his theories that were sponsored by the car producer was then in France to impose a model of the city that was separating the functional zoning system, which is a tragedy for the city, and were made a theory because another false story that is very useful to be used in the School of Architecture that was made in the 60s, so after Second World War, when it was necessary to condemn anything that was belonging to the fascist regime, architecture was taken, while I publish real documents that are showing that the only kind of architecture that was condemned by the fascist regime was the classical one. So today you make some classical project, you will be accused to be fascist. And then you have to let these people understand that in 1938, the fascist regime approved a law that was saying that starting from now is strictly forbidden to build an architecture that is not the current one, to avoid a double falsification with the old and the current history of architecture. All this theory after Second World War brought people like the designer of the Zen I mentioned it earlier to make a theory that historical cities were the places to be left to the evil bourgeois, because for the emerging, this was the word, for the emerging working class, it was necessary to build the New Jerusalem, the classless society place, which is ridiculous. In 2007, and I brought a video that unfortunately we can't project here because we can't make a PowerPoint. I have a video where Vittorio Gregotti, the architect of the Zen of Palermo, in 2007 is interviewed by a TV show that is called Le Iene in Italy. And he's like a peacock in his office in Milan. And the journalist is starting, you are design all these beautiful things. You are living in such a beautiful place. You work in such a beautiful place. And he says, would it be possible to do it better, the Zen? I said, what do you mean? More beautiful? And he said, no, more beautiful than that is not possible. I believe it's marvelous. And so the journalist says, tell me, but would you live there? And his answer, the guy of the New Jerusalem, the classless society, said, there are no conditions. I'm doing the architect. I'm not doing the proletariat. So this is the immense lie that is behind the way we created spaces that are destroying the identity, are destroying it. If we think about the way now we have under our eyes, unfortunately, the destruction of the wars that are affecting Palestine and Ukraine. And what we can see is something that is dating back to the ancient Greek time also, because the worst murder during war is obviously the killing, the murder of people, but is the destruction of the symbol of identity. Think about the Buddha destroyed by the Taliban. Think about the Arch of Palmyra destroyed by the ISIS. Think about the wipeout of the entire Gaza. Now, it's because that is making people depressed and no longer attached to the places they belong.
I think that this is an important point when we go away from warfare and when we take this mindset of achieving a functional architecture for a functional world. No? The idea is that the New Jerusalem is a functional entity.
Now it's sustainable, the word.
Now,
which is unsustainable.
Now, the function can become sustainable, green, resilient. You can take any buzzword.
My book coming out in a while is joking with the words because I'm really upset with those that are abusing of the word sustainability. And I prefer to talk about inheritability because what is presented as sustainable as a bill that is going to be paid by our children and grandchildren. But we have to think about something that is planned for the 7th generation from now.
Yes. And this relates to the decentralization idea. Let's go back into the Greek polis as a hope. I do not say a socialist hope, my God. No. Politics is, this is the idea is when we as active members of a community we as citizens are able to decide how our city, the place we live in, should look like. It's our thing to decide it. And we make a common decision in which kind of place we want to live. And this includes the possibility of evolution. From time to time, we can change this place, also in terms of architecture. And in this case, we would need no grand design utopias any longer. This functionalist mindset is very useful for a capitalist society, for a society relying mainly on technological improvements and on masses of users, of products, and so on and so on. And then it fits perfectly with the functionalists. But what if we design a different future? We take this idea of the polis and the decentralization very, very serious, and say, okay, let's go decentral again. And the real democracy is the decentralization. Could be a way, possibly, in a utopian process. Yeah. Well, more or less. This is, as Aristotle said, a good polis, 3,600 anywatts, plus minus. And, Okay. Wait. Halt, stop. Tina, it's all okay. And the women, meanwhile, the women are included in voicing for the police.
So just be sure, let's have the microphones, make sure we're recording when you guys are speaking. So Ettore did this graphic for us of the evolution, the human creature, and, the functionalist conversation or the lies that robbed us of our identity, the continued, activity that clearly shows us how people can try to destroy identity, the functionalist replacement that doesn't let us even see how our neighborhoods are designed, I think, and the passiveness of the internet, it's we have to, it's maybe incumbent on this moment in time more than, maybe this is just every generation contends with certain levels of this, but we have to almost be metacognitive about how, if that line that Ettore drew down wants to turn back up, probably the major thing will be that we can see how systems are impacting our identity. We can see the identity that we want to, achieve or that we want to sustain within ourselves. And we can see how neighborhood, how the human condition, how, human contact on a daily basis, is paramount, that the human is the ultimate measuring tool, and that the human condition hasn't changed that. And, nothing about our existence has changed the fact that when the human is the ultimate measure of, say, the design of a place, then we are the arc of evolution is going in the right direction.
Hopefully.
That the design of place is connected to what we need to sustain our identity. It's not, other factors are no longer the kind of distorting or hiding that fundamental truth.
The great aspect of tradition is that, first of all, is not some stupid way of being relaxed and say everything is done and I don't have to do anything else, but is to change what doesn't work. Changing things without any reason, reinventing the wheel every day. It's crazy. And the slogan of modern street technology is we have a solution for problems that are not existing and you will be addicted on that. This is insane. Mm-hmm. So everything that has been proved is not working has to be abandoned and improved. But everything that has been proved is working. It's stupid to abandon. So there is no needs of saying, okay, I need to grow. It's like economy. If economy is growing for someone, it's going to be destroyed for others. So at a certain point, it's necessary also to understand that, okay, we are in a good shape. Is it really necessary to grow constantly, damaging others? Or probably we can say, okay, we can be more equal with everybody.
Yeah, this would be a good principle. This would be a new good ethos.
Like when meaningfulness is the goal as opposed to growth is the goal. It's meaningful for me to feel my place in the world because my identity is not coming into question introspectively or otherwise, and I can discern the activities I want to participate in through their meaningfulness to me rather than through influencers or through...
Today, all the countries are addicted on this idea of GPI, I think is in English, in Italian is PIL, this idea that the economy has to constantly grow, which has been proved already by many economists that is not true. So we need a new ethos to understand how city can be, advance and grow with a different way of measuring the...
Yeah, this would be the point, this new ethos. And this new ethos starts in small neighborhoods of people willing to change something what they can really change. And this could be the base for new communities. And this is the saying goodbye to large concepts. This is saying goodbye to an overpowered centralized management. And large concepts saying goodbye also includes, unfortunately, utopian concepts.
But what you're saying there, I mean, in the earlier 1980s, we were speaking earlier, we had Margaret Thatcher. Absolutely changed the landscape. In America, you had Reagan. So you had Reaganism, Thatcherism. Were revolutionaries in the sense that they changed the post-war consensus from the welfare Keynesian consensus to a neoliberal, what might be called workfare. So you go from welfare to workfare. Now, the thing is, Thatcher wasn't just about neoliberalism. She was also about, in inverted commas, empowerment of communities. So there's lots of different discourses in Thatcherism, and Thatcherism changed even during Thatcher's time in power. But partly it was about almost apologizing for what she portrayed were the negative consequences of the functionist welfare state. So in terms of housing, she would say, and it was a key policy of hers in the early 80s, was to sell off all, I was speaking about this yesterday, I think, it's selling off all what we call council homes, social housing. And she did that in a way by saying, look at some of these council homes, and especially flats. They're terrible. They've been terribly built, because they're damp. They have, all these other problems associated. Now, I'm going to set you free. I'm going to empower you. We're going to, those council homes which are better, you can buy these very, very cheaply and become a homeowner. And we'll get rid of the other ones. And then you move further along with Thatcherism, you go into the 80s. You then get Blairism under Tony Blair, arguably another form of neoliberalism. But again, that was all about empowerment of communities. Don't look to the state, the welfare state, because it's very functionalist. It's top down. Look to your communities, look to your neighborhoods. People should come together in social networks and so on. So my point being is that certainly in the UK, we've had lots of decentralization. We've had the so-called empowerment of communities, but that can work within that sort of Thatcherite framework. So I get what you're saying about decentralization, but there's decentralization. I think that's what we have to be clear about, is which empowerment and decentralization are we are we talking about here? Because the Thatcherites are very, I mean, it's a bit like with, sorry, my last point, with big global corporations now, Starbucks and the digital corporations, they all brand themselves with a sense of community. You know, you buy a Starbucks and it's got there, tells you where it gets its ethical coffee from. You know, and it's all about being part of a global. Coca-Cola is about globally connecting us in a community. So again, there's communities and communities. There's empowerment, there's cosmopolitanism and there's cosmopolitanism. And so.
But that is always the idea of the claim, which is always presenting things in a positive manner. We were imposed to change our cars to use electric cars without thinking at the kids in Congo that are dying because of the way they take the materials that is necessary for an electric car. So that's a problem. But thanks to talk about the neoliberalism and globalization, because that is the origin of all the tragedy we're experiencing now. Because until the 80s of last century, Italy was a super wealthy place. We used to have our money. We used to solve all the problems that were happening economically speaking. We used to teach the world with a series of systems that were survived, those that were not destroyed during the fascist regime that survived, like for instance the IRI, that was a model for all the planet. And then at a certain point it was decided to privatize everything and step by step to sell our country for nothing. So almost nothing is still Italian. Many archaeological monuments were privatized with figures that are impossible to be reached. You don't know who are those that are managing. So if you have some problem, you don't know who you have to deal with. And this is a disaster. It's not to talk about the communists. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about this experience of the earliest 20th century. But just as anticipation, you should know that because the development of Rome after the unification was totally based on private investors who are obviously taking care only about their profits and not about the human life, forgetting all the needs of people, Rome experienced two horrible things. One was the bankruptcy of the municipality, and the other one was the social disaster of the working class district, which is the subject I'm going to talk about tomorrow. But what is interesting is that the state, in this case, the first mayor that was elected thanks to the so-called Blocco Popolare, the block of people of Testaccio district in Rome, voted for a mayor that was not related with the bankers, was not related with the clergy, was not related with the nobility. It was representative of the people. They made an incredible transformation, and they understood that since the business was buildings, the only way to get out of the crisis was to become part of the business, which doesn't mean to be communist and say the state has to do everything. But when you engage in healthy competition between the state and private investors, which is something that the neoliberalism is not permitting, you have the state that, as I said earlier, like the Italian civic code says, play the role of the good father of the family that gives the best example. At that point, if me as a state, I can build and sell houses, you, private investor, has to do better than me to win the competition. And this is making the city just for everybody. If we exclude the states, you can have a kind of not ceiling prices, but ceiling behavior to show to the speculators what has to be the right way. The ancient Roman used to have the frumentationes, which was a policy of the emperor that when those that were managing privately the market of the grain, the wheat, and the bread were rising up too much the cost, they were going to the porticus minutia. They were offering for free grain and bread to the population to oblige the speculator to lower down their needs. Guess if we do this with oil now, many wars on this planet are going to disappear.
Right.
Can I just go back to what Ulrich was talking about a little bit about this decentralization as a salvation to the future? I think we have a slight problem. We have major cities all over the world that are decentralizing already, but we have the existence structurally, we have a space existence of city cores that are absolutely void and are emptying out and are becoming totally non-functional. So if we decentralize and everything gets so decentralized, what is the plan from an architectural point of view even of rebuilding these city cores that exist in these cities of 5 to 25 million?
Actually, I made several projects on my own and also with my students showing if we simply rediscover, we reopen the drawers and take the laws and the tools we used to use until 1925 when the fascist regime decided to cancel, we can really bring back the economy of Italy, but those things are valid all around the world. If every country is going to proceed in this manner, can have a kind of independence, can develop some kind of 0 kilometers or few kilometers, even 100 kilometers economy, instead of being addicted on some globalization that is also polluting and killing people. Because, for instance, a year and a half ago, I discovered to be almost celiac, and I can also have milk. And I grew up in a city where we are doing the mozzarella and the burrata that now is so popular. I never had any problem. But the problem is that now, because of this massive economy of globalization, the wheat that used to have 4% of gluten has up to 60 and has the glyphosate. So there are people that are developing intolerances and allergies that can also produce the cancer on the intestine of people. And the same thing is happening with the milk, that because we are producing, because the European community is imposing some measures in agriculture, you can have more than tot number of cows and you can produce more than tot liters of milk, because at the end it's necessary to have the one that is made by other industrial. And so the cows are constantly attached to machines, and they have to give antibiotics to them to prevent the problem on their breasts. And in the chain, the food chain, there are people that at the end are developing intolerance on milk, even if they grew up like me in the place of burrata, which is insane. So if we think at something that is much more decentralized and controlled locally, we can have a more healthy planet, which at the end doesn't need to destroy the economies of other people, but is simply to bring the economy of people that have trillions or quadrillions of dollars, and we don't know what they can do with this. To understand that they can think in consideration what some American Indian chief at the end of the 19th century said. He was a standing bear. I don't know if you know this phrase. He said, when the last fish will be fished, when the last river will be dry, when the last cow will be killed, those people will understand that they can't eat the money they have in the bank.
So bringing this conversation back to identity, I think what we're saying is between centralization, decentralization, between global neoliberalism, are we letting too many other factors determine our identity, or help, make us, unstable in our identity? And that's, so all these factors are asking us, how can we address, what are the pathways in which identity can be reestablished? When Ettore talks about the government being in competition with the marketplace, what I think of is development patterns where private interests are really given free rein to develop. I mean, So I've been in New York many years, and so I'll use a New York example. A major new neighborhood was going to be built in Manhattan. The city's coffers of our tax money was used to make that possible, to build a platform over an open train shed or train yard so that you could build a new neighborhood on top. So the city, spent billions of dollars to make that possible, and even extended a subway line so that you had public transit to that neighborhood. And then they said to the developer, you're going to get all these tax breaks and so forth because, boy, you're going to give us a new neighborhood for our city. And then the developer was given free rein to design it. And what you got was Hudson Yards. And what you got was a neighborhood that totally turned its back on the rest of the city. What you got was a small enclave of incredible, expense and, international investment that had really nothing to do with the city itself. And so so you got a place that's like placeless because it has no connection to this incredible richness of this almost 400-year-old city now, which is very young in Roman terms. But, if we're being metacognitive, we cannot let our identity be determined through growth, through profit, through the false gods of sustainability and so forth. We have to get a control back so that we can feel stable in identity. And certainly our political dysfunction today, I think, is undergirded by people's, feeling the threats to their identity. These things are all interconnected, and they're connected to the placelessness that we're letting happen across the world.
It's interesting in the UK at the moment, and it does connect up to what you've just said, Jason, is that there's a rising far right movement in the UK, and they've appropriated the Union Jack flag, and there's there's a campaign by the right and far right to put the Union Jack flag up in every sort of local high street they can. Now, we're not like America. We don't really have the Union Jack up much. So it is very unusual to see it. And that's part of our culture and heritage. It goes up for royal occasions, if there's a wedding or if there's a football match, you see lots of Union Jacks or at least the English Red Cross flying. But what's happened, in my local high street, and it's the first time I've ever seen it, is some far right person in the night, and they've quite well organised, has put a load of Union Jacks all the way down the high street. It's in other places as well. Not every London town, but there are other places where it's occurred. And, my first thought when I saw it was, God, this looks really cheap and tatty. Have seen all these Union Jacks flapping around. But on a local Facebook group, there's lots of people with thumbs up who you wouldn't expect to be associated with the right at all. These are quite, they see themselves quite civilized middle-class people who might vote for Conservatives or something. But the far right, in order to have this fictitious place and belonging or sense of Britishness, have started putting up the Union Jacks in everyday places. But what's interesting is it's actually brought together others, though, to be against it, to say, look, this isn't part of actually being British. Part of being British isn't to see the Union Jack everywhere. We got nothing wrong with and nobody's ever stopped you putting this flag up. You can put it up anywhere, put it up outside your house. But our culture actually isn't really to see the Union Jack, unless you're in parts of Northern Ireland. They have the Union Jack, the Protestants have the Union Jack there. But in other Facebook pages in the local, there's a real pushback against it as well, and calling it out for what it is. But it's just that place, that sense of belonging, it can be hijacked by the far right to say, well, actually, we want that sense of belonging, but we're going to use it in the right wing direction, and I've never seen it before.
Right.
This thing that's going on at the moment.
There's the God's identity in place, perhaps, in this example. The place could only be hijacked because there was no sense of belonging by the inhabitants. And if this is missing, I have to invent an identity. This was a point from Massimo Venturi I introduced as the guy who wanted to come but who cannot. The very danger, this was his point, the very danger today about identity is it can be ideologized. Also we can construct an identity, for instance, a certain right-winged identity, and then we fill gap. We can do this because the people have no identity, and when we can address it, then we have...
But what is the problem is rising up.
Yeah.
So it's really a serious problem, because today there are people that are really causing to keep their privileges. They are provoking war against the poor. So they are developing this theory that having the flag of your country is offensive. This is ridiculous. Or those that are suggesting to tear down the statue of Cristoforo Colombo because this is ridiculous. So the problem is that then there are extreme, because the woke cause a lot of problems. And I'm very sorry that at the end there are people that have taken advantage to make other political weird things. But I think people that are belonging to those so-called minority, I don't know how they can be proud, for instance, thinking that because there is the idea of having quotes, breaking any kind of privacy, when you apply for something, you have to talk about your sexuality, your religious, your color. You must be named because of your knowledge, because of your ability, not because of the color of your skin, your religion, your sexuality, because that is ridiculous. And I think if I would be part of one of these categories, I would be offended if someone is going to say, okay, you have the right to do this because of that. Mm-hmm. There are funds. If you take a look at a Netflix movie, it's written crime or whatever, and then there is also the category LGBTQ. I have nothing against these people, but thinking that there are special funds for these categories in whatever kind of, or there are special competition or whatever contests only for those that are belonging to this category. It's something to want to be different, because if you are part of the society, why you need to have a specific category? I independently, again, from any kind of idea of religion, politics, sexuality, etc., we are all humans. We must be all the same, and I don't have to have the flag of my sexuality to say who I am.
But it is, this is only possible, and this was my point, when I have no identity, these phenomena will occur. And then identities are ideologized.
Exactly.
So it is abuses. And this is fundamentalism and fundamental.
And you will be accused to be fascist because you have the flag of your country, which is ridiculous. It's my country. Why I don't have to be proud of my own origin?
But yeah, no, I think in the case of the UK, that nobody has ever, what the right are saying that we'd be made to feel ashamed of having the Union Jack. And it's not, no, people do, like I say, for occasions, they do fly it, but, born and bred in the UK, it's never been part of our culture to have the flag. It's not being ashamed of it. It's just hasn't been there. I would say one thing, though. We have to be careful, I think, about when we talk of, the sort of different identity politics, because a lot of that discourse is actually, it's a stereotypical discourse often put forward by the right. So I remember in the 1980s, it wasn't, the term back then to denigrate identity politics wasn't woke, it was political correctness.
Right.
Yeah. And there were a lot of stories in the early 80s in the sort of right-wing press about these left-wing councils, particularly in London, who are putting forward political, you're not allowed to say the nursery rhyme, bar, black sheep, because you're not allowed to talk about black sheep. It's disrespectful to the black community. But studies show these were myths. It was never the case. It was the right-wing press saying we weren't allowed to say it, but there was no examples of this at all. But it generates a discussion about political correctness, what we aren't allowed to say.
Many times is an hypocrisy, because at the end, politically correctness is also the right strategy to avoid the debate.
Yes.
So, okay, it's fine. But if you don't take a position, the tyrant is always winning, because you can't accept, okay, let's do it. That's fine. I have to say it's wrong if something is wrong. Whoever is in front of me, if the Pope is wrong, I will let him know that he's wrong. Because until people are not taking a position, we can't forget that what happened 80 years ago, it is a consequence of people that were not taking a position. What is happening today is exactly the same. We're always repeating the same problem, sometimes because we are afraid to say that, sometimes simply because we don't want to take a position because of politically correctness. And politically correctness probably is the consequence, is the reason of the consequence we are experiencing.
So I just wonder whether political correctness, although all woke, is an agenda often constructed by the right. Say we're not allowed to say that when we are allowed. We're not stopped, and people do talk about.
I think it would be the wrong track to discuss about is it justified to speak about wokeness or not, and or rightness or not. This is another point, and I think it's in the direction of identity. It's a difference. If I can be proud of my country's heritage, therefore I do not have to be a right-wing guy. Not at all. The point is about fundamentalism and ideologization. When I have no identity, identity cannot be created. Identity has to grow like a place, and neighborhoods have to grow. Identity is a product of history. No? A good living together, for instance, generates a certain identity. A bad living together also. And if this is all lacking, if there's a deep, deep void inside the individual self, and if there's no true collective, means no lived and sensed collective consciousness of whom I am belonging to, and then I have to create something. The woke cancel cultures and green frog parties or what the hell ever, and claim this as identity, and this is the procedure of fundamentalism. And fundamentalism is no identity, it is a pseudo-identity.
But it's very useful for those that are causing war against poor, instead of bring these poor to understand that probably they are poor and they are living in such a horrible condition because of those that are promoting things like this for their interest to keep.
I agree totally. The point, to conclude from my side, the point is the lack of identity generates the need to create identity. And the danger is this becomes ideology, and at the end of the day, a fundamentalism.
This is the consequence of placelessness, in a way.
Exactly. This is the consequence of placelessness.
But if we look at the internet is based on algorithms, and billions of people look at the internet and live by the internet doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a country. It doesn't have a community in the essence of dialogue. So therefore, the generation that's coming will, I don't think it's fundamentalism. I think it'll go to nihilism, which is just, why do I even need society?
Which is the fundamentalism of nihilism. Because at the end, the idea is exactly that, to flatten the planet and create a series of shifts that are following the flow without thinking of what is going on.
But have any of us ever questioned where is the source of the algorithm that's creating that?
So I think we're about to break, but I think it's a good point to try to like summarize what we think we've been able to probe here. I think if we take identity and place, we're saying, okay, place there's a definition of place that involves the idea of belonging. It involves universal inclusion. It involves a sense of meaningfulness, and from that you can both identify with place and you feel identity through place. And when we don't have place, we're lacking belonging, we're lacking meaningfulness, we're lacking connection, and therefore placelessness is undermining identity, right? That these things might be, they're not causal necessarily, but they might be co-relational. So we're going to take a break. And when we come back, really the wrap up of the rest of the afternoon is going to be to try to say, okay, how does all that, it's great that we have Ettore's view on the communal, right, on communes, and we're going to talk about the individual and communal, and how that's going to lead us into the conversation on day 2 about the city. So I think this has been the goal of this morning or this session was to get us a foundation of conversation, terminology, definition that we can now start to apply at these scales and then bring it up to the conversation about the city tomorrow. So great place to break.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.